Israel is at war. Hamas has started a deadly attack on Israel. Around 1,200 civilians killed, around 1,000 on the Palestinian side. Israeli women and elderly have been raped. Is Iran powering the attacks? 6 billion worth of funds have been freed for the Iranian government after sanctions had been lifted due to a prisoner exchange program with the US. This was a month ago. Does Iran want to disrupt the partnership which is forming within Israel and Saudi Arabia? To understand the conflict, we need to delve into the history of this region. The historic timeline of Israel-Palestine conflict. And of course, India's stand. Palestine is the Holy Land, the Promised Land for Jews, Christians and Muslims alike. From the 1500s, all these communities lived relatively at peace under the Ottoman Empire. All this while, systematic persecution of Jews was already happening in Europe. In the 1800s, the Jews united for a formation of a Jewish state. 1897 was the formation of the first Zionist Congress, which was in Switzerland. The decision was taken to create a holy land in Palestine. Jews all over Europe started migrating to the Promised Land. World War I starts. England and France attack the Ottoman Empire. England collaborates with the Arab factions against the Ottoman Empire, promising them an Arab country. But before the war ended in 1916, England and France went into an agreement where they would share the land after the battle to keep their control over the region. You just can't trust the Brits. They played a double game. England needed support from the US. England asked the Jewish community in the US to pressurize them to help out England in the battle versus the Ottoman Empire. In exchange, they promised the Holy Land, a Jewish country, Israel. After the war, a British mandate was imposed, which left the Arabs and the Jews with nothing substantial. Still, the Jews kept on migrating to the Promised Land. Meanwhile, World War II started, and we all know about the Holocaust and Hitler's ethnic cleansing of the Jews in Germany. There was a huge spike in Jewish migration between 1918 and 1947, where there was an increase of Jewish population from a meager 6% to 33%. After World War II ended, England and France didn't have any resources to maintain a colony in the Middle East. But what will happen to the promises which were made to both sets of people? The UN comes in. The UN promises a two-state solution. India voted against the two-state solution, they themselves being subjected to a partition, and knowing the horrors and atrocities this kind of policy brings along with it. The Arabs were against a two-state solution too, fearing Israel would just become a puppet state for the West to have its influence around the Middle East. And they went wrong. Under the two-state solution, 55% of the landmass was allotted for the Jewish community. The Arabs weren't happy with it, and war commenced. All the Arab countries waged war against Israel. Surprisingly, Israel fended off the Arab invasion and increased their land percentage from 55 to 78. 7 lakh Palestinians got displaced in this war. Who was responsible for this? Of course, the West. As a retaliation tactic in 1956, Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal, barring Israel from using it. England, France and Israel joined forces and attacked Egypt, acquiring huge amount of land. But they had to remove their troops due to international pressure. One thing was clear through this war, that whatever be the situation, the West was always going to back Israel. In 1963, the third war commenced between the Arabs and the Jews, and in 1967, the fourth one. Understanding Israel's military power, Egypt started looking elsewhere for a solution, maybe through diplomatic talks. There was temporary truce which was brought about in 1978. Israel gave back all the land that it had acquired from Egypt, but still were adamant to keep the land they acquired from the Palestinians. Who suffered? The Palestinian civilians. More than 5 lakh Palestinians got displaced during this time of war. The Palestinian Liberation Organization was formed. It was recognized by the UN. But the factions were unhappy because of its timid stance towards Israel. As a result, in 1987 saw the formation of Hamas, the organization which is responsible for the mayhem which is happening today. Their demand: erase Israel from the face of this earth and form an Islamic state. On the other hand, there was formation of another extremist group in Lebanon, the Hezbollah, who have joined forces with Hamas on their attack on Israel. There is no doubt that Israel was and is brutal with their actions against the Palestinians and the Palestinian supporters. But why is that? Even the UN condemned the strategy of the Israeli forces against militants. The answer lies in the simple fact of the Israelis having formed a survival instinct after being persecuted throughout history and having faced discrimination for centuries. A soft stance would hardly be effective, but still there were some attempts at truce. The PLO and the Israeli government almost came to an agreement for a two-nation solution. In this plan, parts of the land would be governed by the Israelis, parts by the Palestinians, and parts by both. But the Israeli citizens didn't support this decision. They were afraid that the Arabs would attack again. In 1995, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin got assassinated by a conservative Jew faction. Fast forward to 2005, Hamas was already frustrated with PLO's soft stance against the Israeli forces. As a result, civil war commenced between Hamas and Fatah, a faction of the PLO. It resulted in the West Bank being governed by Fatah, and the Gaza Strip was left for the Hamas to control. Gaza is said to be the largest open-air prison in the world. The citizens cannot travel outside, the Israelis having control over their food, water, and electricity. In short, the Israelis ramped up security along the Gaza Strip borders, having control over supplies and keeping the population in poverty. What can be the Hamas attack termed as? Some say it was an act of terrorism, some say it was out of desperation. But it can't just be a black and white answer, considering the long-drawn conflict between the Arabs and the Jews, and the troublesome history associated with this area. And of course, the outside influences giving the conflict a different shape throughout history. Now we come to the main question: what is India's stance? India has been playing a balancing act since the formation of Israel. In 1947, India voted against a two-state solution. But on the other hand, in 1950, India recognized Israel as a country. India was the first country to recognize the PLO, demanding the land being given back to the rightful owners, the Arabs, even economically helping Palestine throughout these battles. Though after 1991, the India-Israel relationship became stronger, still 50% of India's energy needs was fulfilled by the Middle East. India has defense ties both with Arab countries and Israel. Throughout history, different Indian politicians have voiced their opinions on how the land should be given back to the Arabs, who are the rightful owners. As recent as 2022, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has stated his support for the Palestinians and their right to demand their land back. But after the Hamas attacks, he tweeted that this was an act of terrorism. There is no question that raping Israeli women, killing their elderlies, and having no consideration before murdering their children will not culminate into a Palestinian state or getting their land back. It is just inviting trouble as Israelis start their offensive, wiping thousands of civilians out. The only things on the card is a bloodbath. But again, there are some theories which are cropping up suggesting Israeli forces held themselves back during the first few hours. Why would they do that? To justify their full-fledged war against the Palestinians? That's a question to ponder upon. The most powerful secret service in the world, the Mossad, didn't know anything about the attacks, especially in the Gaza Strip, where they have eyes 24/7. Something might just be fishy. Either way, it's the people who suffer on both sides, no matter which side you choose.